The jar was already open when Asen Drool lost control of his jaw. He noticed the jaw first, a small click lateral independent of anything he had consciously decided to do. His secondary jaw, the one that operated on its own when he was concentrating hard or processing something complex, had fired without input. He logged it immediately. Involuntary motor response, cause unclassified. Then he deleted the entry. Then he refiled it under a new category he created in the same breath. Involuntary physical response, cause pending. He had been an archivist for 31 cycles. He had never created a category called pending. The jar was small, 11 centimeters tall, sealed with a pressure clip. Inside it, pale green slices in a cloudy liquid. The liquid moved slightly when the jar tilted. The Vethpalari at the upper vent, 4 of them, had backed against the wall 3 minutes ago and had not come down. Their chemical sensors were reading something Asen could not see, and whatever they were reading had sent them upward as a unit, which was what Vethpalari did when they encountered something extremely alive. No warning on the access log, no registration at the terminal, no request filed for the annex. The human girl had simply sat down, opened a tin, and begun eating. 600 years of threnic consolidation records were 3 meters to her left, and she had not looked at them once. She was 17. Asen had checked her file. The war had ended long before she was born, and here she was, carrying pieces of it in a battered blue container that rattled when she moved. The Morek in the far corner had accepted the jar when she offered it, extended one of its 4 arms, received the jar, opened it without hesitation. Asen had not anticipated this. He was still processing it. She had not offered the jar to him. He had not expected her to. He noticed the omission anyway, and then noticed that he had noticed it, and then opened a new incident report because he did not know what else to do with the information. Under cause of incident, he typed 3 words. He stared at them. The cause of incident, he stared at what he'd typed, stay with me. 31 cycles earlier, Asen Drool had never filed an incomplete cross-reference. This was not a boast. It was simply a fact about himself the way it was a fact that his left arm was slightly longer than his right, a calcification error from his juvenile stage, long since compensated for in how he reached for things. He had 4,000 cross-reference entries in the main index, all of them complete, all of them accurate, and he kept the full index in memory as a point of professional integrity, not pride. There was a distinction. He had explained the distinction to 3 junior archivists over the years. 2 had understood. 1 had asked if the distinction mattered in practice. He had not spoken to that one voluntarily since. The verification deck occupied the interior of archival pillar Nen4, a reclaimed orbital station that had been running at climate-controlled nitrogen-rich atmosphere for longer than any currently active species had been a consortium member. The walls held 9,000 physical data cores in color-coded sleeves, amber for military, green for agricultural, blue for cultural continuity records that no species had requested in over 40 cycles. The floor hummed at 34 Hz from the cooling system below. Asen had stepped over the floor grate near console, row 7 exactly 11,282 times. He knew because he had counted for the first 12 cycles, and then the number had simply stayed in him, accumulating. The air smelled like nothing. This was by design. Asen's membrane fronds, 6 of them, running along his spine from shoulder ridge to lower dorsal, had been the color of pale amber since he arrived that rotation. Amber was his baseline, his normal, the color of an archivist at work on a clear day with no complications. He had spent 31 cycles cultivating that baseline. Every Kelhari leaked emotional data through their fronds whether they wanted to or not, and Asen had learned to treat his as a secondary data source. They told him things about a situation before his conscious mind had finished processing it. He had never found them wrong. He had also never been able to suppress them, which he considered an acceptable professional liability as long as his fronds stayed amber. That morning before the girl arrived, he had been cross-referencing supply manifests from the Threnic Consolidation's 3rd naval phase against a newly recovered cargo index from a secondary station. Routine work. The kind that kept the index clean and the 34 HZ hum company. Junior researcher Besson was at a console 4 meters away, doing the same type of work with a different set of manifests. Besson had been on the verification deck for 3 cycles and had the particular quality of silence that Asen valued in junior researchers. Present, productive, invisible. The access terminal at the deck's entrance logged arrivals automatically. A soft tone, a green confirmation flash on the wall panel, a new entry in the day's rotation record. Asen registered these things without looking up. 3 researchers had entered that morning. All 3 had signed in correctly. All 3 were at their consoles with data cores open. The fourth arrival did not produce a terminal tone. He looked up because of the absence of sound, not the presence of it. And there she was already seated, already at a corner console, a battered blue tin on the surface in front of her. She had not checked in. She had not signed the rotation log. She had not pulled a data core from the rack. She had simply appeared at a corner console and set the tin down, and the tin had rattled when she set it down, and the rattle was not a sound that belonged in the archive. Asen logged it as unidentified percussion, origin, personal container, and pulled her file. The file flagged immediately. Anomalous origin documentation partially degraded. He had been on the verification deck for 31 cycles. He had never seen that flag before. Teva Asen, age 17, independent civilian researcher, research clearance, grandfathered through a maternal line service record predating the current consortium filing system by exactly 200 cycles. The system had processed the clearance but had not been able to fully verify its origin. It had flagged the anomaly, logged it, and then continued functioning because that was what systems did when they encountered something they could not fully explain but could not deny either. Asen's membrane fronds shifted from pale amber towards something deeper. He did not look at them. He did not need to. She was slight, dark-haired, and moved with the unhurried ease of someone who had never felt watched. She adjusted the tin so it sat flat on the console. She did this with the small, practical care of a person who did not want something to roll off a surface, not the careful precision of someone performing tidiness for an audience, just the reflex of someone who had done it many times before. Then she opened the tin. The lid had a click on the left side hinge, a small, specific sound different from the earlier rattle. Asen noted the distinction. He revised his original log entry, first revision. Before she opened it, she tapped the lid 3 times with 2 fingers of her right hand. Quick, automatic, she did not appear aware she had done it. He had no category for a 3-tap ritual performed on a personal container by a 17-year-old civilian researcher in a nitrogen-rich archival reading hall. He created a note, origin of tap, determine. He did not know yet that he would spend 14 rotations on this question and find nothing. What he did know, watching her lift the tin's lid, was that his fronds had now shifted to a color he associated with the early stages of a data discrepancy alert. Not alarm, just, something does not fit. His species called this hue working amber. It meant the body had already started solving a problem the mind had not yet named. He went back to his supply manifests. He lasted 4 minutes. The grain block came out of the tin wrapped in waxed cloth. It was warm. The archive's ambient air sensor at her console registered a localized temperature spike of 19 degrees. A food heating element built into the tin, Asen had not known that was possible in a container that size. He logged the temperature spike. He logged the food heating hypothesis. He sat with both entries open, unsure which category they belonged to. The Morex throat sac hum dropped half a register. This was not subtle. A Morex baseline hum was as constant as the deck's 34 Hz floor tone, and a half-register drop was the equivalent of a person leaning forward in their chair. Asen noted it. He did not know yet that it was the first of 4 register drops to come. The Veth Palari at the upper vent drifted 3 centimeters closer to the center of the room. All 4 of them, moving as a single unit the way they always did, drawn by the temperature spike or the smell of the grain block or something else Asen could not identify. Olfactory primary species. The archive's nitrogen atmosphere suppressed most ambient chemical signals, but the tin had apparently brought something through. Besson, 4 meters away, had stopped typing. Asen stared at Besson. Besson had not moved in 2 minutes and 40 seconds. In 3 cycles on the verification deck, Besson had never stopped typing for more than 40 seconds unless directly addressed. Asen checked the time. 2 minutes and 50 seconds now. She took a bite of the grain block. The sound of it, dense and audible in the archives, designed quiet, was somehow the most ordinary thing Asen had processed all morning, and also the most out of place. Like hearing someone's heartbeat in a room where everything had been built to prevent sound. The Morex hum dropped another quarter register. Is the annex restriction waivable for descendants? 7 words. She did not look up from the tin when she said them. She was unwrapping a second section of the grain block with the same practical attention she had given the tin lid. The question landed in the archive's designed silence and sat there. Asen's fronds flushed from working amber to a rustoran. His species registered as category does not yet exist. He was not aware of a professional context in which that phrase applied to a membrane frond color response. It applied now. The annex, he said, has a restriction classification based on material sensitivity, not on the relation of the researcher to. I know, she said. That's why I'm asking if it's waivable. Her diction was plain and minimal. No preamble, no qualification. She stated things the way a person states facts they have already verified and are now simply transmitting. He pulled her file again. He looked at the maternal line service record, the one predating the current system by 200 cycles, the one the system had flagged as anomalous and then processed and never resolved. The record was from the Threnic consolidation period. The service branch was listed as Field Support Non-Combat Essential. He had seen this category before. It was the category the consortium used for personnel who had not carried weapons. He looked at Log Annex 7 Theta's access history. 6 accesses in 200 cycles. 4 of them automated system checks, standard maintenance scans, scheduled, logged, unremarkable. The other 2 were Teva Asan, consecutive days, 8 months ago, before she had applied for in-person access. She had pulled the digital record remotely from an unregistered data terminal twice before she had ever set foot on archival pillar NEN 4. She had known what she was coming for before she arrived. Asan's fronds cycled through 2 colors in quick succession. He became aware that every researcher on the deck, the Morek, the Vethpaleri Besson, could read exactly what his fronds were doing and that there was nothing he could do about this. He opened the Annex Restriction Protocol and began reading the waiver conditions. He had read them before, years ago, as part of his general orientation to restricted materials. There was a descendant of record clause. He had never had occasion to invoke it. The clause existed because someone had anticipated that this situation might one day occur and had been precise enough to write it down. He approved the waiver. He sent the confirmation to her data slate without speaking. She nodded once. Short, matter-of-fact, the way you confirm that something you expected has arrived on schedule. She opened the annex on her data slate with the same unhurried attention she had given the tin. She scrolled. The tactical sections went by fast. The casualty records went by fast. Her thumb slowed at the supply documentation. Before she looked up from the annex, Asan straightened the data core sleeve in slot 4441. It had been 3 millimeters out of alignment for 6 days. He passed it every rotation. He straightened it every time. He did not know why he did it now specifically. It was simply the thing his hands did when the rest of him was waiting. He returned to his console. The 2.8-to-1 ratio, Teva said, to no one in particular. She was not looking at him. She was reading the annex and eating the grain block simultaneously, with the same 2-track attention of someone who had been doing both things together for a long time. They had it by cycle 3. She took a bite. The grain block was audible. The Morek's hum dropped another quarter register. Asan looked at the annex supply documentation on his own terminal. He had pulled it up while processing the waiver request, and it was still open. The 2.8-to-1 ratio appeared in the field ration preparation notes for the Threnic forward stations. A grain-to-liquid ratio, listed under a recipe notation in a field cook's supply addendum. Cycle 3 of the consolidation. The addendum was in the supply section because someone had categorized it as a resource allocation note, and it had stayed there, unflagged, for 200 cycles. He looked at the name on the addendum. He looked at the name on line 31 of the annex. Field Cook, Threnic Forward Station, Non-Combat Essential Personnel, Deceased, Cycle 4. The surname was Asan. Not similar, not close, identical. He checked the cross-reference system. The system had flagged the surname match as a likely duplicate entry error, a logging artifact from a period when the consortium's record-keeping was less standardized. The system had suppressed the connection. It had been suppressing it for 200 cycles, quietly, automatically, because it had been designed to resolve apparent errors rather than investigate them. And this particular apparent error had sat in the index and generated no alerts and no follow-up actions and no revisions, and had simply been wrong for 2 full centuries. Not a duplicate entry error, 2 different people, same family, a direct line. Asan's fronds shifted to a color that required him to create a new entry in his personal emotional register index. He had not added to that index in 11 cycles. He titled the new entry, Hue Produced by Finding That a 200-Cycle Suppression Was a Mistake. He stared at the title. He decided it was accurate. He looked at Teva Asan, age 17, eating a grain block made to a ratio her ancestor had recorded in a supply addendum 600 years ago. In a forward station she had never been to, in a war that had been over for longer than anyone currently alive had been breathing. Not a duplicate entry error, a person, a line, a tin that rattled. She closed the annex. She put the last section of the grain block back in the tin. She pressed the lid down with the heel of her hand, firm, practiced, and the left side hinge clicked. The Morek's hum had not come back up. Besson had still not typed a single character. The Vethpaleri were closer to the center of the room than they had been when the rotation started, pulled by something Asen's own sensors were only beginning to register. She reached for the second compartment in the tin. Whatever was in it, the archive's sensors had not cataloged the smell yet. They were about to. The second compartment opened with a sound like a seal breaking, a soft, pressurized exhale that the archive's sensors had not been designed to log and did not know what to do with. Something orange, two pieces of it dense and slightly glistening, wrapped in a cloth that had clearly been treated with something because it did not smell like the waxed cloth from the grain block. It smelled like the cloth was working. Containing. The Vethpaleri, who had been drifting slowly back toward the center of the room, reversed course in a single smooth movement and pressed themselves flat against the ceiling vent. All four of them, simultaneously. Their chemical sensors, Asen knew, had a range about 9 times wider than anything else on the deck. Whatever was in the cloth, the Vethpaleri had decided the ceiling was the correct response to it. Besson made a sound. Asen had worked alongside Besson for 3 cycles. He knew Besson's range of work sounds, the low click of keystrokes, the occasional small tone when a cross-reference confirmed, the brief silence before submitting a completed entry. What Besson produced now was not in any of those categories. It was not in the consortium's emotional register catalog either. It was something between surprise and recognition, and it came from a species that Asen had always understood to be emotionally legible but never previously surprising. He looked at Besson. Besson was looking at the cloth. Teva unwrapped the orange pieces with the same practical attention she had given everything else in the tin. She ate one. She did not comment on it. She did not look up. "The old logs say they ate through everything," the Morek said. The sound of it filled the archive the way low-frequency sound always does. You feel it before you hear it, in the floor and the base of the ribs. Asen went still. In 31 cycles, the Morek had spoken without being addressed exactly 0 times. It sat in the far corner where it always sat, its forearms folded in the particular configuration that meant settled and listening, and it had just broken a 31-cycle streak of silence because of a piece of orange food. Even the campaigns that ran past their supply lines, the Morek added, barely above a vibration. The throat sac hum had dropped to its lowest register yet. Teva looked up for the first time since she had sat down. She looked at the Morek with the expression of someone doing arithmetic in their head, not calculation about whether to speak, but calculation about how much to say. She had that kind of face. The kind where you could see the economy happening. "The annex doesn't have the full list," she said. Some of it wasn't written down because she didn't want it confiscated. She closed the second compartment. She adjusted the tins slightly so it sat flat. Then she reached in through the main compartment, past the remaining grain cloth, and removed a small sealed jar. Asen Drool had cataloged over his career somewhere between 80,000 and 90,000 individual items across the consortium's various archival holdings. He had developed over those 31 cycles a professional baseline for encountering unexpected things. The baseline was log, categorize, file, continue. He had applied this baseline to weapons, to biological samples, to cultural artifacts so old their material composition had no contemporary equivalent, to a communication device from a species that no longer existed. He applied it now. He looked at the jar. He logged the jar. He noted its dimensions, 11 centimeters tall, sealed with a pressure clip unlike any standard consortium fitting, and began the process of determining a category. His secondary jaw clicked. Lateral, independent. The same involuntary movement from the cold drop moment at the start of the rotation, except now he was looking directly at the cause and still could not stop it. The click was audible. It produced a silence in the archive more complete than any silence Asen had experienced on the verification deck. Everyone had heard it. Everyone now knew that Asen Drool's body had responded to a small jar of pale green slices in cloudy liquid, in a way that even Asen Drool had not known his body could respond. He did not delete the entry this time. He let it stand. The liquid in the jar moved when Teva set it on the console. The pale green slices were thin, cross-cut, uniform in a way that suggested a practiced hand rather than a measuring tool. The cloudy liquid they floated in caught the console's overhead light and held it, slightly luminous in the way that living cultures are luminous, not the way that glass is. The Vethpaleri's chemical sensors were now registering something that made them press tighter against the ceiling vent. Their collective position read as extremely alive. 600 years. 600 years of making it. 600 years of carrying the ratio forward in the only container that had never been confiscated. The pressure clip on the jar was not standard consortium issue. Asen could see that plainly. It was machined from something, a different alloy, slightly thicker than the fittings on consortium biological samples, with a seam pattern that his cross-referencing instinct immediately flagged as non-standard manufacture. He pulled the materials list for the Threnic Forward Station's equipment inventory. He scanned it. Under salvage and repair materials, Cycle 3, coolant coupling stock, secondary grade, partially depleted. The coupling fittings were the same. He sat with this for a moment. An archivist on a forward station during a 600-year-old war had machined a pressure clip for a fermentation jar out of salvaged coolant coupling, because the standard clips had been incompatible with the internal pressure of whatever was alive inside, and that jar had traveled across 3 forward stations and 2 naval crossings. According to the supply movement logs, he was now pulling without entirely deciding to, and arrived here on archival pillar Nen 4, on a console in the verification deck, carried in a battered blue tin by a 17-year-old who tapped the lid 3 times before opening it. Teva opened the jar. She ate one of the pale green slices. The archive was entirely silent, except for the 34HZ floor hum. She offered the jar to the Morek. The Morek accepted it, extended one of its 4 arms across the considerable distance between their consoles, and received the jar with a care that Asen registered as deliberate rather than careful, the distinction being that careful is about not spilling, and deliberate is about meaning something. She did not offer it to Asen. He did not expect her to. He noticed the omission for the second time that rotation. He noticed that he was not sure what he would have done if she had. The Morek opened the jar, held it for a moment without eating, and then, in a gesture that was slower and more considered than anything else that had happened in the archive that day, brought it to the lower sensory membrane below its throat sac. Not eating. Something else. Something Asen did not have a category for in the Morek cultural register. The compound in this jar, Asen said, and then stopped, because he did not know how to finish the sentence with the information he had available. Teva looked at him. It was the first time she had looked at him directly. My family has made it every year for 600 years, she said. We make it from the same base culture, the same one she started. She did not say who she was. She did not need to. The annex, Asen said carefully, describes it as an unidentified preservative agent, possibly medicinal. Teva nodded, short once. She wrote that description herself, she said, because she didn't want it confiscated. Asen's membrane frond cycled through 6 colors in 4 seconds. He could feel them doing it. He could not stop them. The speed 6 hue shifts in 4 seconds was the rate his species associated with processing a logical paradox, with encountering 2 true things that cannot both be true. His fronds had never moved at that rate in a professional context. They were now. Every researcher on the verification deck could see them. The colors included gray-green, which was the color his species associated with what could only be described as the feeling of nausea mixed with something like awe, a color that did not have a clean translation because his species had never agreed on whether the feeling was bad or important. He had never produced gray-green on the job before. He was producing it now. He filed a note about this, and then did not know where to file the note. The woman in log Annex 7 Theta, line 31, field cook, non-combat essential personnel, deceased, cycle 4, had written a false description of her own fermentation preparation in the official record of a 600-year-old war, so that the compound she had been making, and that her family would continue to make for 6 centuries after her death, would not be taken from her by the same institution that was now on this rotation, housing her great however many times over granddaughter at a corner console. The jar had survived because she had lied to the archive. The archive had preserved the lie perfectly for 200 cycles, while the truth sat in a tin and rattled and passed from hands to hands, and arrived here with a 17-year-old who already knew exactly what she would find in the supply documentation because she had checked it remotely, twice, 8 months ago, before she had ever applied for a visitor pass. Not a visit, a confirmation. She had not come to study the war. She had come to finish what her ancestor packed. Asen looked at the tin, the battered blue surface. The thumb-worn patch at the center of the lid, cobalt-worn to a soft, chalky color from years, many years, layered years of the same hand pressing the same spot. The hinge on the left side that clicked when it opened. The rattle inside that he had never been able to identify from the sound alone, that she had never explained. That was not on any material's manifest he had found. He was aware, quite suddenly, that he had been trying to file this tin for 4 hours and had not come close. He opened a new note. He titled it, Things That Cannot Be Filed. He looked at the title for a long time. He did not delete it. Teva closed the jar. She returned it to the tin. She closed the second compartment. She put the grain cloth back. She pressed the lid down with the heel of her hand, firm, the same way she always did. 3 taps. Left hand, 2 fingers. Quick, automatic, without apparent awareness. Asen watched the 3 taps land on the lid of the tin, the way he would watch data print from a primary source. Something had passed from a person who died in Cycle 4 of the Threnic consolidation to a person currently sitting at a corner console in a nitrogen-rich reading hall, and it had not passed through any document he had ever cataloged, and it was more complete than any transfer he had on record. She stood to leave. The tin rattled. She picked up her data slate, tucked it under one arm, and walked to the exit with the same unhurried economy she had arrived with. At the door she paused. She said to the Morek, "Thank you for the company." She did not say anything to Asen. She did not look back at the archive as she left. The door sealed. The archive returned to its 34 Hz hum. The Veth Palari came down from the ceiling, slowly, in a single drifting movement that suggested they were not fully certain the coast was clear. The Morek's throat sac hum was still at its lowest register. Besson had still not typed a single character. Asen looked at his open log entries. 11 of them. Unclassified, pending, needs review, anomalous. In 31 cycles, he had never had more than 2 open simultaneously. He closed none of them. He sat in the designed quiet of the archive and listened to the floor hum. After a while, he opened an incident report. He recapped his stylus, set it parallel to the edge of his console, as he always did before submitting a document. He picked it back up, looked at the incident report, and then put the stylus down again. Not parallel this time, just down, at a slight angle, which was not something he did. He typed classification failure, subject, lunch. He stared at it, he submitted it anyway. 6 months later, the incident report was still the strangest document in his personnel file. He had reread it 47 times. He had not changed a word. The procedural exception had taken 4 months to clear. 3 committee reviews. 1 formal objection from a junior subarchivist named Verath, who had argued that the chain of custody for the donated item was unverifiable by current consortium standards, because the item predated several of those standards by a significant margin. Asen had attended the 3rd review specifically to address Verath's objection. He had been a senior archivist for 31 cycles and had never previously attended a committee review voluntarily. Verath had looked at him across the table with an expression that suggested this fact had not been missed. Asen had said, "The chain of custody is the point. The item survived because it was carried, not because it was documented." Verath had not responded. The committee had approved the exception. He wrote the plaque himself. He checked every word. Terran field ration container, Threnic consolidation period, approx. Cycle marked 600 BP. Carried active fermentation preparation across 3 forward stations and 2 naval crossings. Internal ratio documentation confirmed accurate against log annex 7 theta, supply section. Gift of the Asen family, descendant of line 31. He wrote the entry, he checked the ratio, he left the rattle out. He read the plaque text 3 more times after completing it. He added nothing. He removed nothing. He recapped his stylus, set it parallel to the edge of the console, and submitted the document. It was the most consequential archival decision of his career. He had not expected it to feel quiet. It did. The opening ceremony for the Cultural Continuity Wing was attended by 34 researchers, 6 committee members, and 1 representative from the Threnic Memorial Archive Board who had made the trip specifically, because the item was the first human artifact to enter the consortium collection as a primary donation, rather than a recovered or captured piece. The board representative had asked Asen during the reception whether he expected this to set a precedent. Asen had said he expected it already had. Teva Asen had not attended the ceremony. She had sent a note. The note said, "The ratio is right. I checked it against the annex 1 more time before I donated it. She would have wanted to know it matched." There was no further explanation of who she was. Asen read the note 4 times. He filed it in the Asen case record. He added a cross-reference note. See also, line 31, log annex 7 theta. He thought about it for a moment. Then he added a second cross-reference note in a field he had not used before. See also, things that cannot be filed. He had found Besson's research request waiting in the approval queue that morning. Access to log annex 7 theta. Purpose of research, personal. Besson had never submitted a research request under personal before. No Kelhari on the verification deck had. The field existed in the system because someone had put it there, and it had gone unused for 200 cycles, and now it had been used, and Asen had approved it in under 4 seconds without flagging it for review. He did not know if this was correct protocol. He could not find the protocol. He was beginning to think the protocol had not been written yet. After the ceremony ended and the last researcher had gone, Asen walked back into the new wing alone. The 34Hz hum from the cooling system ran through the floors here too. Same frequency, same source. The archive sounded the same everywhere you stood in it, which was something he had always found orderly and correct. He stood in front of the display case. The tin sat behind reinforced glass. Lit at 3400K, the light was warm, warmer than the rest of the archive, chosen specifically for objects that had surface texture worth showing. The thumb-worn patch at the center of the lid caught the light differently than the rest of the surface. Softer, slightly matte where the cobalt had rubbed down to bare metal and then worn smooth again over time. Decades of time. Generations of time. A patch worn by a hand that had pressed this same spot so many times it had changed the material, and then by another hand, and another until the pressing was not even conscious anymore, just the way you closed a tin. His membrane fronds were still. For the first time in 31 cycles, Asen Drool was not cross-referencing anything. He was not categorizing. He was not logging. He was standing in a quiet room in front of a battered blue tin behind reinforced glass, and he was simply looking at it. It occurred to him that this might be what humans called paying respects. He was not certain. The concept was in the cultural index, but the cultural index did not describe what it felt like from the inside, which was perhaps the point. He stayed another 20 minutes to be sure he had done it correctly. The plaque did not mention the rattle. The light from the case fell across the floor in a narrow bar. The tin's lid was still. The thumb-worn patch held the light. Somewhere inside the sealed container, behind the reinforced glass at 3400 Kelvin, the rattle, whatever it was, wherever it lived in the space between the walls of the tin, sat in the same silence it had always sat in. He had written the plaque himself. He had left the rattle out. There are things the archive is not the right container for.